I believe this story just resonated with me this week for some reason. I don't know why. It was drawn to it, and the more that I studied it, the more I realized, okay, that's our story for this week. So we titled this message, "Let's Go to Your House. We Need to Talk." And as we look at Jesus speaking to Zacchaeus today, we continue getting personal with Jesus as we've been looking at this series of messages, and we revisit this story of Zacchaeus. Now, again, it's one that we've heard maybe many times, and it's another one that has found its way into children's books. I mean, it's obviously a very familiar story in that capacity as well. But as we've learned through the course of our time together, even those stories, the old familiar stories, Noah and the ark and Daniel and the lion's den and Zacchaeus in the tree and all these things, there's deep meaning there versus just the simplified children's version, which they're great. They introduce things. But when we begin to look at it and say, wow, there's really something here. It's an amazing thing. And so we find here that one of the keys that I'm hoping and praying that is this message is that I'm going to be able to bring out by the end by the time we finish is something that you've really not seen before. Not because I'm some great deep scholar. It's not that. It's just, it's there. And if we'll just listen, God will show it to you. I believe that. I really, really believe that. So we turn to our passage today, Luke 19, the first 10 verses, and we look at this story. And so we find in verse 1, it says, he entered into Jericho and was passing through. So Jesus is on the road again, right? He's in Jericho. But this, I said earlier as we were reading the scripture, something we were going to point out. It says he was just passing through. All right, so we remember, just as it was with the woman at the well, he said, we have to go. I need to go to Samaria. So we see here there was a reason that he was just passing through, as we will find as he hooks up with Zacchaeus. So we saw there, and we find that there is a purpose for his route. Jesus never does anything just for so. So as we see all the travels that he's going, whatever road is going down, whatever city he is entering, there's a reason. There's someone there that needs what he's got to offer. Do we believe that he can still do that today? It doesn't matter what road you're on, friends. He can find you. Whether it's on 95 or whether it's on Route 421 or Route 66, it don't matter. Wherever you are, he can find you if we will listen to his voice. And what the beauty we find in this story is he knows our name. And as I said in the opening, I had to blow Zacchaeus' mind, the fact that Jesus knew his name. But I love how this continues to unfold. So it tells us in verse 2, there was a man named Zacchaeus who was a chief. So he was an important guy, tax collector, and he was rich. So who is this guy? Who is Zacchaeus? Why is this significant? Well, again, we got to look at a couple of different components about this. Number one, we see he was a chief tax collector. All right, so immediately we know right then and there he was not a popular figure in town, right? Because even today, I don't know about you, but not many people like tax collectors, right? That's usually not the most pleasant job or the most received job in the world, even to this day. But here we see he was a chief tax collector. So he was up on the ladder, right? And then it gets a little bit more. We get a little more detail because it says, and he was rich. Now, what is that giving us a hint to, friends? There's a very strong chance he was corrupt. There was a very strong chance he was a crook. One for you, two for me. All right, so we see that because he was in charge, so it was probably easy to slip one under the table, right? Again, we don't want to accuse poor old Zacchaeus because we weren't there, but that gives us every indication there was something not right because tax collector and rich probably, we can put the two and two together. Doesn't take very long to figure that out, right? But we find something interesting as this continues to be revealed to us in verse 3. It says, he was trying to see who Jesus was, but he was not able to because of the crowd and since he was short. He was trying to see who Jesus was. So we have to consider a couple of things in that analogy. Obviously, the reputation of Jesus was known. right? He's traveling from town to town. People know who he is. The word is out. So there's a curiosity here about, well, I need to see who this guy really is. I want to see what the hype is all about. But we also find here, this is Zacchaeus. He is the rich tax collector, and he wants to see who Jesus is. One might have to ask, well, why? What is important about this? Was it only the reputation that Jesus had as he was going about? Or was it conviction over something he had done? Maybe he was feeling guilty, as we will kind of see as he kind of spills his guts to Jesus instantly, right? As soon as he calls him by name, his life was changed. How many of you, when you first heard Jesus call your name, your life was changed? I know mine was. And when we see the beauty of how this unveils itself, we find, was it guilt? Was it condemnation? Or not condemnation, but was it conviction? Or was it a simple curiosity of, well, you know what? Let's see what this is really all about. And obviously the crowd was large, because I said people were in the way here. He couldn't see because of the crowd. And obviously talks about his short stature. And so he was trying to see who Jesus was, but it tells us he was not able to because of the crowd, since he was a short man. Well, the key phrase here is he was trying to see. He was trying to see. In other words, he was making an effort. This was important to him. It wasn't just a one-day event, and I'm going to try to get over there if I can. But how many of us sometimes, we have that intention, well, I'll go to this event or that or whatever, if I can get over there, but then it gets closer to time and I'm busy and heck with it, I'll go another time. This was something important to him. He was intent on finding a way, and it wasn't the crowd size that was going to get in his way, and it wasn't his short stature. Because, again, what do we do? What do we do when something is really, truly important to us? We find a way. We don't let it go. It's not just a passing thing. No, I'm going to find a way. It may not be easy. It may not be convenient, but I'm going to find a way. This is where we find Zacchaeus. This speaks about his heart. Because oftentimes something we're dedicated to, we're going to find a way, right? We're not just going to let it be because, well, it's a burden on me. It's something that I really, really want to find out about. I need to know what's going on. So we see in verse 4, it says he was running ahead. So this was really important to him. He was dedicated to this moment. He was running ahead, and he climbed up a sycamore tree to see Jesus, since he was about to pass that way. So he knew he was on this path. He was headed that way. So he's running ahead. He's getting before the crowd so that he could see Jesus walk by. That was such an important thing. He really wanted to find out, what is this all about? And it tells us he climbed up a sycamore tree to see Jesus, since he was about to pass that way. So he was willing to make the effort. He was willing to make the effort. He didn't give up. He didn't let his short stature be an excuse. Well, I can't because I can't see. Or I can't because I can't do this. And that's an easy place to get, right? It's an easy place to get because we can justify it of why we didn't do something. We can find a justification that we do it all the time. But yet still what we see here is he didn't let that get in his way, but rather he found a way to see Jesus. He found a way. I'm going to get there. And we read that he climbed up a sycamore tree. Here's one of our first beautiful points that I love this. Long before Zacchaeus needed that tree, God created that tree. He had it. It was already in his path. It was going to be there. Long before Zacchaeus needed that tree, God planted that tree. I love that. It tells us he went before the crowd, but here's the beautiful point. God went before Zacchaeus and made sure his tree was there. Let me tell you something this morning, friends. He can go before you too and make sure your tree is there. Make sure your opportunity is there. Excuses are just permission to lie. Mostly it's to ourselves, and sometimes it's to others. Why we can't do this or we can't do that. It's more that we've convinced ourselves of that rather than it being true. Here Zacchaeus could have easily said, man, I'm an important guy. I got a lot of money. I ain't time to fool with Jesus. Or he could have said, well, the crowd's too big. I just don't want to mess with it. He could have said, look, I'm a little guy. I can't see, so it's just too much effort. I'm not going to do it. But no, we don't find him doing that at all. Zacchaeus' tree was waiting for him. It was waiting for him. I think that's such a beautiful point, because sometimes we don't see that because we don't make the effort to get there. Okay? Because what we need to see today is Zacchaeus' tree was waiting on him, but so is ours. And the day that we need to climb it, it'll be there. The day that we need to climb it, it'll be ready. And the branches won't be weak. We won't have to worry about whether it's going to break under us. It's going to be ready so that we can see what it is that we need to see, even if it's Jesus just walking by. Okay, because those times, I believe, will happen. So verse 5 goes on to tell us, when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, because today it is necessary for me to stay at your house. So Jesus, it tells us, came to the place. What place is that? Where Zacchaeus was standing in the tree. It was at the exact moment that he looked up. Okay? He knew exactly where he was at, because as he was passing through, there was a reason that he was passing through. And it was going to come by to see little Zacchaeus. All right? What a beautiful thing that we find as we see the placement of all things. It says, when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus. Now, Zacchaeus, we're not told, had any relationship with Jesus whatsoever. None. Okay? He just wanted to see who he was. And Jesus called him by his name. Man, think about that. There is nobody that Jesus can't reach. You know, just like we saw in that film, here's a man from a different faith, you know, that in some areas, and some of you guys know this better than me, would lose their life if they publicly professed that. Okay? And lost his family. I mean, but he didn't. They were all restored and all brought. He knows our name. I want us to understand the beauty of that today, friends. You know, there's something about when you walk through a crowd. Maybe you can be at the mall, or maybe you can be walking down the beach, or wherever you're going. And there's 1,000 people out there, and you can kind of feel alone. You can. But all of a sudden, you hear somebody call your name. First off, you look and say, who is it? I mean, no, but they call your name, and all of a sudden you realize, I'm not alone anymore. Somebody knows my name. You know, hopefully it's a good thing, but you know, and hopefully it's not, you know, not a wrong recognition. But here's the point: God knows your name. He knows who you are, and He loves you. And it's an amazing thing. This Zacchaeus, he wanted to see who Jesus was, and he was getting ready to find out. And I love that. If we pursue God, we will find Him. The Scripture says, if we seek, we will find. You know, if we ask, it will be answered. If we knock, it'll be open. And we find that here. So Jesus calls Zacchaeus and he says, hurry and come down, because today, he's saying right now, this is your moment, man. This is it right now. It is necessary. And that is a key word here. It is necessary for me to stay at your house. So I've called this sermon again, let's go to your house. We need to talk. Jesus knew the need that Zacchaeus had. He knew that. He knows your need, whatever it may be. It could be physical, it could be spiritual, it could be emotional, financial, it could be whatever. There's nothing that God can't do. Do we believe that today? Because oftentimes what we're finding in our world is we're placing our hope in everything but the right thing. You know, again, we've said this before, used this analogy before, but it's like the old country western song, looking for love in all the wrong places. Well, that's today. We're looking for hope in all the wrong things, because what we're placing our hope in is temporary. What we're placing our hope in is something that probably most likely will let you down at some point in time. Whether it's one another, whether it's a system, or whether it's a procedure, it doesn't matter. So, well, it wasn't what I had hoped it would be. How many times have we said that to ourselves in this life? Man, I thought this was going to be the thing. You know, I mean, it looked good on the commercial. It was great. I got the thing. I made my 2 easy payments in 1995, and it broke on the first time I used it. Man, I'm let down. You know, or I voted for this person because they promised they were going to do this, and they didn't do it. Zacchaeus worked in the system. People probably didn't like him very much. We can see that as we will let this story continue to tell itself. But Jesus said, today it is necessary that we go to your house and let's have a talk. It is time. Zacchaeus, it tells us, came down hurriedly. But we see Jesus, when he calls upon Zacchaeus, now we know why he was passing through. It had a purpose. It had a reason. And we see the beauty of this story. So it is necessary. Again, when we look at words, we always break down words. Necessary just simply means essential. It means required. This meeting had to take place. So he's saying, come on, get down out of the tree. It's time for us to go and have a talk. Okay, Zacchaeus was clearly not going down a good road. All right? It was time to make a change. He wanted to see who Jesus was. He was going to get to find out. What would he do with that? We'll see, right? Verse 6, it goes on and says, so he quickly came down and welcomed him joyfully. I love the way that is written. Because again, when you break that down, so this is the result of Jesus calling him he, Zacchaeus, quickly came down. He was obedient to the Lord. When God calls your name, answer. Just trust me on that. I remember years ago, and I think I've shared this, I know I have, but when I really knew the Lord called me to do this work, I was completely overwhelmed at the idea, because again, public speaking was not my thing at all. I had no problem with doing my job as a police officer and talking to people and or whatever, but that usually was, based on legal things, and you're under arrest. That's pretty easy to say. Nobody. That's not really not that hard, right? But the idea of speaking about something that I knew nothing about, but I knew what God had said, and I remember later, running from that and putting that off for a while. And him saying again, when you do what I said, everything's going to get better. You got to trust me. Here, when Zacchaeus heard Jesus call his name, he was obedient and he came down because, again, he wanted to see who Jesus was. That was the whole story. We're told he wanted to see who Jesus was, and he ran ahead of the crowd and he got up the tree. And now he's going to get a chance to find out. And it tells us he quickly came down and he welcomed him joyfully. I love that word. I think that word's important, that we highlighted that in one of our slides here, joyfully. Let me ask you this question. Do you welcome the Lord joyfully? Think about that for a minute. Do you welcome the Lord joyfully? Or does sometimes life get in the way? Man, I ain't got time to fool with that right now. I'm busy. I got to get this done, or I got to get that done, or man, the game's not over yet. I mean, let's just be real. What about the joy of DVR, man? You can check that later. Sometimes the things of God come first. I've shared this before. This is a true story for those of you who haven't heard. We pastored a church years ago in another state, and the very first couple of Sundays that I was there, if I got past 11:30, people got up and walked out. I'm not a long, drag-out kind of guy. I think I've proven that over our time together. But you want to get the message out. You want to say what the Lord's got to say. And I'm like, well, what the heck's going on? I seen it happen a couple more weeks. And I'm like, wow. So I finally started asking a few people. And they're like, you don't know, do you? I'm like, no, I have no idea. They said the Packers kick off at 12. And that's what comes first. And I'm like, wow, okay, we're in a different place, right? And that's a true story. But do we welcome the Lord joyfully into our lives, or does life get in the way? The other issues sometimes get in the way. Jesus called Zacchaeus by name. He told him, he said, listen, we need to talk. We need to go to your place. Today we need to go to your house. I'm going to stay with you. This was a personal encounter with Jesus. And I want us to understand the beauty of that. The personal encounter with Jesus. What we find in these moments, as we've seen through these stories, and we'll see through a couple more over the next couple of weeks, they always result in a changed life. Every single time. Every single time. Whether in the positive or the negative. But there's always a changed life. As we talked about this past Wednesday, there was a personal encounter between Jesus and the rich young ruler. But it said that he was sorrowful and walked away because he had a lot of stuff and he didn't want to give that up. That was more important to him than his very soul. But what does Jesus say? Who would lose their very soul for everything? Who would gain the whole world and lose their very soul? He did. He had everything and he said, no, it's not worth it. Okay, but we see here, Jesus in that personal encounter always results every single time in a personal change of some direction. So we read that Jesus was welcomed, I love this, by a tax collector. He was welcomed by a rich tax collector, and it was done so joyfully, regardless of what this conversation was getting ready to be, because Zacchaeus did not know. He didn't know whether Jesus was going to get all over him. He didn't know if, you crook, you thief. He didn't know. But he was excited just to be in the presence of God. How awesome is that? When we think about the beauty of this story. So what he's saying is, I'm setting everything aside right now. None of this matters. Only thing is, I get to spend time with Jesus. That was all that mattered at this moment. Just his presence creates change. The sound of his voice, the clarity of his call, it does something. It just does something. And we see here that Zacchaeus responded quickly and joyfully. Okay, so I'm in a hurry. I want to get over here and see I wanted to see what Jesus was, who Jesus was, and man, here he is. And he called me by name. How great is that? I mean, it's just an amazing picture for me. And so then we see the hearts of others. So Zacchaeus, here's the Zacchaeus. He's the one that could potentially be on the hot seat. He's the one that could potentially be, under condemnation or judgment or whatever from God. But he didn't care. He was setting all this stuff aside. And we see that those who were around them, in verse 7 it says, all who saw it began to complain. He's gone to stay with a sinful man. Remember that crowd that Zacchaeus was running before to get to the tree? Well, obviously they were still there. And so they're seeing this exchange. They're seeing this conversation take place between the chief tax collector, and again, he's well known and probably not for the right reasons. He's probably not very well liked, and everybody saw it. Everybody saw him talking to Jesus. They saw this conversation. And it tells us they began to complain. They were complaining. Now again, they complained about Jesus no matter what he did, right? He couldn't do any right in a lot of people's eyes. But then on others, they were like, well, wait a minute. Why would he talk to that guy? Why would he spend time with that guy? And so they're complaining that Jesus is talking to him. They said he's going to stay with a sinful man. Sinful man, which is to say, he's not worthy of any time with Jesus. He's not worthy of saving. It's easy to develop those feelings, if we're honest, right? We see people in this world, maybe in high positions, that honestly we don't care for. And I think that's a fair and an honest statement to make. Okay, that we don't care for. And we've based that upon their actions, upon their policies, upon the way that they treat other people. And that's a very, very easy, a very human place to be. Okay? And we can find those that we don't like. We can find those that we don't agree with. But I've been challenged on this, and I want to challenge you. We have to remember that God values that soul. And that's so difficult to process. It is so difficult to process. How serious was he? This is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 44. But I tell you. Okay, so when we see the words of Jesus, it's very clear, right? And he never makes it a middle of the road or a gray area thing. It's always very, very clear. He says, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Like, man, I don't want to do that. That don't feel right. So that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise, S-U-N, on the evil and the good, and sends rains on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward will you have? In other words, I love you because I do. There's no challenge in that. I fell in love with you, or you're my child, so I automatically love you, whatever. He says, don't even the tax collectors do the same? So we see the specificity. There's a big word for the day. I don't use many big words, but I had to practice that one to get it out. But so we see here, he said, even the tax collectors, and we're talking about Zacchaeus today, right? They love their wives. They love their husbands. They love their kids. Don't they do the same? He says, and if you greet only your brothers and sisters, What are you doing out of the ordinary? Oh boy, there's a challenge for us in this, right? What are you doing out of the ordinary? Don't even the Gentiles, because these were non-believers, that's the reference there, do the same. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Of course, not speaking perfect as in perfection like we determined that. That's difficult. That is difficult what he's asked of us here. He's saying, man, the tax collectors, they love their family too. Therefore, they need me. You need to pray for those that don't like. You don't need to pray for those that you don't care for. But we have to remember that's difficult. But here's what I want us to focus on for just a moment is the impact of a soul saved is immeasurable. The impact of one soul being saved is immeasurable. We can't imagine the idea of that, of someone we don't care for, someone that's an awful person or whatever. But let me tell you something, friends. If we study Scripture, Paul was an awful person. Okay? He was awful. He was on his way to persecute the people that were believing in Jesus. He was on the way to take lives, put them in jail, all this other stuff, and had his personal encounter with Jesus on the Damascus Road. And the results of that one soul being saved is a big portion of this. The results of that one soul being saved, the king would say, I want to find that guy that turned the world upside down. That's who I want to be. You know, I don't want to be noted for anything. None of that stuff matters. Anything, titles, recognitions, whatever. Who cares? You just want to be the one that turned the world upside down with the truth, because that is what we see in the value of one soul. So again, we think today the impact of a world figure, whoever they may be, somebody of true influence, somebody that, a name that everybody knows, and it doesn't matter who it is, we can just pick one. Okay, but just think about this for a minute. If they were to publicly claim a genuine love for Christ, the doors that could open, the witness that could be. But yet many in the world today, even those who claim to be followers of the Lord, will complain that Jesus is talking to someone sinful. That's still a problem today. I see it all the time. Of course, I have a ever-growing presence on social media. And that's intentional because I want to share the gospel with as many as possible. And I love sharing the gospel with all of you and sharing these beautiful stories. But in that presence, I have the opportunity to reach thousands and thousands of people. And it's kind of a beautiful thing, right? And so, but in the presence of that, you get to see what other people are doing as well. And I saw a video this past week of someone who again, they claim to be a believer. And they made a whole entire video of questioning the prayer of a recently saved man. And their whole entire critique was, there's nothing Christian about that guy. Look at him. Look at the way he looks. Look at the way he dresses. Look at his hair. Look at his language. And there's nothing Christian about him. He's just found a new addiction. That man spilled his guts. I saw the prayer. It was beautiful. Was it eloquent? No. Did he have all the big words to say? No. He just shared Jesus, man. He just shared the Lord. And that's all that matters. We don't get to make that call, friends. We don't get to make that call. God knows the heart. And we need to be mindful of that today. There are people, Paul says, that many people aren't in the same place that we are. Maybe we've been around the road a little bit long, down the road a little bit longer. Maybe we know a little bit more. Maybe we're a little more knowledgeable. And maybe somebody just got saved yesterday. Maybe somebody got saved this morning. They're not ready to get up here and share anything. They're not even ready to share their testimony because they don't even know what it is yet. Are we to condemn them and critique them and cause them to say, have I made a mistake? Are we to critique them and tell them to go the other way? Because that's not what Jesus said. That's not what Jesus said. So here's Zacchaeus, one that nobody liked, one that was an influential figure in their community because he was the guy that would take your stuff if you didn't pay your taxes. And everybody knew who he was, right? And Jesus saw fit that his soul had value. There's a lesson in that all by itself when we see how this story goes. And so we read in verse 8 that Zacchaeus stood there. So he's hearing this. He's hearing the complaining. He's hearing the arguing and the griping, whatever. And he said to the Lord, look, I'll give half of my possessions to the poor. Now, granted, Jesus has said nothing to him other than we need to go have a talk. So instantly there's something going on in his heart. He said, I'll give half of my possessions to the poor, Lord. And if I have extorted anything from anyone, I'll pay back 4 times as much. So we see Zacchaeus here. He heard the voice of opposition, but we also see the immediate impact of his encounter with Jesus, conviction. He said, Lord, Lord, he recognized who he was. I'll give it all away. I'll pay back. I'll do whatever. The psalmist writes, and this is beautiful. The psalmist writes in Psalm 139, and I think this is important for us in today's society, that we understand the pure presence of being in an encounter with the Lord. Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24 says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my concerns. This is it. See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me to the everlasting way. That was David. He said, Lord, I don't want anything in here that's not supposed to be. Show me, teach me, get it out. Instantly we see the reaction of Jesus in verse 9, because there was a heart change that day. Zacchaeus immediately was under conviction of the Lord, and he changed his ways on that day. And Jesus said, I love this, verse 9, today, not tomorrow, not after you do this or after you do, no. He said, today salvation has come to this house. Man, that ought to be exciting to anybody. That ought to be exciting. He said, right now, today, salvation has come to this house. This was a life-changing moment. See, Jesus went on. And he said, because he too, all right, we see here, he, Zacchaeus, too, the two O's, that means also is a son of Abraham. What is he saying here? He's telling others, hey, this one counts too. This one counts too because he's mine. This one counts too because he matters. See, souls are precious, friends. We need to understand this, which allows him to make it very, very clear in this past verse, in the last verse, I should say, why he came. Why did Jesus come? What was the message? What was the intent behind what was going on? And he says very, very clearly in verse 10, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost. Man, oh man, oh man. Here, listen to how beautiful this is. For the Son of Man, Jesus, has come, this is the why, to seek. This is an action. The must need go, the passing through. Here's why it all happens. To seek and to save. The word save means rescue from danger. I love that. The lost. The Message writes it this way. It says to find and restore, which is equally as beautiful if you look at it either way. It doesn't matter which way you look at it here. I love this. What Jesus was saying, the message he was giving was clear and direct. And it still is today. Right now, that hasn't changed. We look at this and we read and understand Jesus came to seek. Again, that is an action. He was looking for Zacchaeus. He was passing through, but he had somebody on his mind. I just like it when he was going. I must need to go through Samaria, but he had that lady on his mind that well. I'm going to change that life today because it's going to impact. And why did it impact? How did it impact? She ran into town, and it said, and many believed on that day. Here we see Zacchaeus. He's in contact with everybody. Not just a couple people in his community. He's the guy. Everybody's got to come see him. And look at this now, how their life is going to be changed. He was looking for Zacchaeus to save him. To save him, to offer him the truth, to offer him freedom, to offer him life eternal to the lost. In other words, those without him, those that are seeking answers, those without direction, those that are dying literally and spiritually. He said, that's why I came. That's why I came. That's why I still came. That's why it's still important today. Zacchaeus had a personal experience with Jesus. And he left there with his life changed. He left there with his life changed. These moments, friends, let me share this with you as we wrap this up. These moments are still available today. So let me ask you this. Will you run ahead of the crowd to see who Jesus is? Will you run ahead of the crowd to see who he is? Are you curious at all as to who he is and what he has to say? Just remember, your sycamore tree is planted. It is growing, and it is waiting on you to climb it. It is there. It is in place because God has gone before you and He is ready to bring salvation to your house if He has not done that already. Will you accept His offer? Will you accept His offer? If you already have, will you show others joyfully? Will you show others joyfully because you know what it means to know Jesus? Will you let them see that? Lost people, friends, are everywhere. And that's not a condemnation. That's not any kind of mean-spirited talk or anything. Lost people are everywhere. Not because they don't know where they are, but because they don't know where they're going. Lost people are everywhere. Help point them to their tree. Help point them to their tree so that they can see who Jesus really is. Amen. As the